Welcome to Ray Lucaria, the hardest academy in the lands between. I'm Boss Rector Haba. My hammer is hard. These cannons hit hard. These paintings make me hard. Rusty's editor has a shop full of a prophecy. Home and Instinct, Sacred Tower, Redmane, Resurrection, Flightless Bird. These paintings keep the academy hard and my hammer hard. Get 2 paintings and then use code Krusty to receive 30% off of both items. The best way to directly support this channel's editor. Damn, these paintings are hard. This academy is hard. My cannons are hard.
I mean, hell, let's just get started, I guess. Homing instinct. Death. The absence of life. The recognition of one's own mortality. One of the most common themes in modern art. You feel like waking up sad as shit every morning? Oh, you already do that? Well, if you don't, then Homing Instinct is the type of painting you're looking for. Whether it's eternal paradise or eternal unconsciousness, a literally unimaginable future awaits us all. And so to manifest all that dread, nothing accomplishes the job more than a pile of eroded tombstones. The vertical continuation that follows the tombstones, the multiple trees, the eroded chapel way in the back, is all rudely and abruptly cut off by these massive, bothersome support beams right below the bridge, taking the otherwise breathtaking landscape here and cramming it into this butthole-tight, airplane, bathroom-sized frame of view. The vantage point chosen by the artist here pisses me off. Like, you could have moved, you could have hiked your way back to Vare and given yourself a view 10 times more impressive, because your scene would have contained the actual Erdtree and not this generic value brand imposter. And the bridge obscuring half of your detail would have been entirely out of the way. If anything, it would have felt more like an accessory, something that actually contributes to the composition. No, the decision to include the bridge here is fucking malevolent. The bridge takes up way too much real estate for it to be an accident. As for the reward, the Incantation Scarab is nice early game in the same way that most things are nice early game, because you're a poor, wretched soul with no resources and the game's already asking you to kill dragons and oversized bears. The Incantation Scarab removes 15% of the FP cost for all incantations, and only in exchange for around 5% less damage negation. Well, give or take. It's armor stats, so it's almost never a perfect whole number, but like, whatever, you get the idea. 5% more damage taken leaves you vulnerable to a bunch of shit that would have usually killed you anyways. It's really not that significant, at least up until you get to Altus. But any point beyond that is when the opposition starts gaining a little momentum, and by the time you get to mountaintops, they've discovered nuclear fission, and 5% more death is not a thing you'd normally want. But you do see some pretty good payoff in builds with high-cost incantations like Golden Vow, Placidus Axe Ruin, and later game heals and the like. If you're not in a high-stakes combat situation like a boss room and you're just pushing through a dungeon or something, you can always retreat to a spot out of combat, slap on the head, heal, then return to whatever you had on before. I've come around to liking it over the years. Blessed Blue Dew and Primal Glintstone Blade can both help it out a ton, and FP cost is just one of those things that normally don't get considered too often in a bunch of builds, and I think it's underrated. Prophecy. This one's really interesting. Usually to convey large vertical distances if the subject is at a great height, you would have lots of long vertical lines, and this painting certainly does that, but I think what does a better job of getting this message across is all this negative space over here on the left-hand side. The artist here picked a wonderful vantage point that places almost the entirety of Southern Limgrave in view while looking over one of the game's largest dead zones. There may not be a completely vertical trend in the line work here, but I do like the strong upwards diagonal formed by the cliff formation here that naturally leads your attention to the castle in the background. It's not driving home some grandiose message about how all our accomplishments will amount to nothing because even the brightest paintings become dust one day or something. It's just some strange man with a brush just appreciated the shit out of those trees and decided he wanted to paint them. It's simple in delivery, message, color palette, and the grandeur of the scene sort of just speaks for itself. I mean, it kind of has to. It's a painting. Kind of has to do that. Finding the vantage point location gives you the Warhawk summon, which is an Ash I've always really liked. It doesn't feel horridly overtuned, but it feels like it outclasses most others in its tier just because of its verticality, preventing it from getting stomped out by lots of different ground-based attacks. And like, don't get me wrong, the damage is fresh shite in a wicker basket, but I mean, it's a summon, so of course it is. It's not punching holes through walls like it dry swallowed fistfuls of horse pills for breakfast or any of that shit, but the utility of being able to just fly over most of its problems makes it a constant distraction that rarely gets hit sometimes. I'm not going to say it's invincible, but it gets hit less often, like noticeably less often than other summons. It's a nice middle ground when you want just enough firepower and just enough distraction. Honestly, it's kind of the summon for people who don't care about summons. Resurrection. It's been like 3 years since I made the last video, and I still struggle with the messaging on this one. It seems way too structured and calculated to not be attempting to deliver a message. I just can't seem to pin down exactly what it is. What are you trying to tell me? Does overexhaustion in my youth via organized education lead me to an early death? Is this an institutional advertisement for the academy itself, and the tombstones are just, just in the way? No, I get the feeling everything we're seeing here is framed with 100% full intent, and that's because the different techniques on display here is evidence of this particular artist being a cut or two above most of their competition. The shading of the diagonal rocks beside the tombstone demonstrate the painter's capable grasp of chiaroscuro, while the longer strokes in the sky and dotted textures on the tombstones in the academy spires suggest the artist had access to multiple tools. Like whoever they were, they knew the shit out of what they were doing. This leads me to believe that this painter was a longtime alumnus of the school. This person got very bitter, maybe they went to the bathroom without the hall pass and the vice rector turned him into a fish, and that bitterness manifested into this clever commentary piece we're looking at here. Or FromSoft's environment team really liked that tombstone asset for some reason. Or since the reward is a larval tier, this is just the game's way of pointing you to where you can use it. You know what? I think I'm settling on that one. That would kind of make sense. That would make a lot of sense. The reward itself is a nice big undo button for all your build mistakes, and a borderline necessity in higher New Game Plus iterations. A set of juvenile sorcerer clothes, and a larval tier in case you accidentally started building Mr. Unga Bunga Man for the 95th time and you decide that maybe you want to cast some spells and shit. Both the juvenile scholar set and the larval tier talks about rebirth in its description, which gives the idea of larval tiers being used for something like respecking kinda cool in my opinion. I thought the concept of respecking a build was stupid. Laughable even. If you had told me I would eventually make respecking a routine part of every normal playthrough, I'm pretty sure I would have accused you of a crime. But you have no reason not to. There are so many goddamn stomber stones and smithing materials in the game that you can easily end up maxing out 3 or 4 different weapons just by complete accident. There's a total of 18 larval tiers in the game each run, and this knowledge gets really important because if you're trying to grind out all the way to New Game Plus 7, having the willingness to just throw out the entire build once per legacy boss and respec your character to hard counter a certain area is one of the best ways to ensure you don't immediately get zonked. Redmane. The Redmane castle painting is a masterful display of using negative space and man-made obstructions to articulate fear and danger in a gut-wrenching personification. This is a scene that isn't afraid to tell you it has nothing to offer. It wants to make sure you stay clear the hell away from everything depicted therein. This is done to convey a sense of morbid curiosity. It seems that a type of fan brush was used to soften the textures up near the sky, while a completely different technique was used for texturing the roughness of the stone columns in the foreground, leading me to a very harrowing conclusion. I don't know what chemically unstable mess this person painted with, but the artist was somehow able to get their hands on enough ingredients for multiple. This man had to throw together some egg tempera using demi-human shit in the lake of AIDS down south, and it is that exact desperation that comes across vividly in every stroke. The soft fog-like textures that obscure the finer details of the scene and the distant, almost imperceivable horizon line formed by the wailing dunes work together to draw the viewer's eye immediately to the castle, framing it to suggest that this castle is the first, last, and only beacon of safety in the entire landscape, and none of the people in it are here because this is what they picked for the group vacation. Like, that is not a fucking Holiday Inn over there. We are stranded and we need help. Hunt down the vantage point, and you will get the Rain of Arrows Ash of War, only usable on bows, so already starting out with a pretty harsh limitation, but that's not to say it doesn't have its proficiencies. It zeros dragons and magma worms like my old calc teacher zeroed papers, making it a wonderful utility if you want to start heading back toward Dragon Barrow and hunt down some of the local flavor, and it's really good for inflicting status ailments onto anything stupid enough and or large enough to stand right under them. Each projectile only deals 50% of its damage in status as a normal bow shot, but the trade-off for that is the consumption of only a single arrow to launch an average of 12.3 arrows per volley, giving you a much higher ceiling of utility. I shit on bows, quite a lot, because I think they could have used a bit more time in the oven as a weapon concept, but Rain of Arrows is honestly a pretty slick Ash of War with all the limitations it deals with, and the only thing preventing me from getting my hands on it is the reckless disregard for life I felt during the rock climbing expedition required to even get to the artist just in the first goddamn place. This sequence of jumps here doesn't feel like platforming. It feels like getting over it with Hidetaka Miyazaki, and I'm losing. Wow, I wonder how the artist died. This place looks so peaceful. Oh god! Champion's Song. Alright, we have a lot to talk about with this one. So the obvious major focal point I'm immediately drawn to here is the hero's grave guarded by the Black Knife Assassin that's conveniently left out of the picture. Maybe she was feeling insecure that day and kindly asked she be left out of the scenic contents, but the piece does feel heavily weighted to the left without much going on anywhere else. We have the angles of the mountain slope slowly guiding the viewer's eyes toward the left of the painting, not only comfortably leading them to the hero's grave, but also the very distant volcano manor occupying space in the background here. It's one of the paintings of all time. I'll give it that. This is indisputably a painting. This is one of the resting videos of all time. I'm not gonna look at this and confuse it for a steak and cheese sandwich. It's pretty clear what we're dealing with here. I have a knee-jerk reflex of distaste towards this painting because the scenery feels like it's dishonestly depicting an idealist's representation of what it would look like if there were no lightning or Black Knife Assassins, or if the dragon 10 feet directly behind where this was painted just never flew in. But on this note, this is something I think all of the DLC paintings are sorely missing. If each painting represents the final vestiges of an artist's perception right before death, there's almost always a source of great danger lurking closely around the vantage point that opens the window for a decently comical observation. For this one, it's Lanciax. For the Sorcerer painting, it's a giant skeleton spirit. Guy who painted Redmane probably got lasered by the golem behind him. And be it intentional or not, it had a good foundation for a potentially humorous inside joke, and I'm sad they didn't capitalize on it, because I think they could have. I am not accepting any bad opinions on the heart bow. Except for my bad opinions. Only my bad opinions are allowed, and this bow fucking stinks. The damage is absolutely frothing with mediocrity. Being a unique weapon means you can't swap out the ash for rain of arrows, which I probably wouldn't have even wanted to do if it actually just came with a unique ash, and its record-breakingly low stat scalings create the foundation for one of the worst all-time weapons in the game. But true love is unconditional, and y'all with your fancy Excel sheets and your smith boxes ain't no shit about what truly makes a weapon stand out. I love this bow and all of the frothing mediocrity that comes with it. This, in combination with the Envoy horn weapons and other pseudo-musical instruments like the Wraith Calling Bell, brings to the conversation the potential for a Bard class to exist somewhere in Elden Ring, and I'm not sure when or where exactly that road got abandoned, but evidently they didn't think it was worth the final cut, and that makes me sad. Flightless Bird. Bro, why is it that every time someone has an opportunity to capture a brilliant scene of the Erd Tree, there's just a big fucking wall blocking half the scene? Like, how did someone choose this vantage point and think, marvelous? Well, for this painting in particular, there might actually be an answer. Flightless Bird is a gentle journey that begins at the scene's base while steadily guiding the viewer upwards towards the Erd Tree, with vertical continuation at the smaller trees, up towards the castle wall, and finally the Erd Tree itself, extending far outside the boundaries of the canvas, representing the tree's throbbingly large branches and wide-reaching majesty. Every element of the scene contributes what it can to the ultimate and only message it needs to deliver. This tree is 100% him. Hemi Turner, Himbolton, Worcestershire. If it was a Chainsaw Man character, it would be Hemi. No, that one wasn't that funny. Even though it's far from my favorite painting, it's a scene that claims my respect because its message is implicit yet honest. The massive castle structure here is actually fulfilling a very specific purpose, and I believe it's the reason the artist chose this vantage point. This structure is proportioned perfectly to look like it's attempting to block the viewer's perception of the tree, yet it's still massive enough by comparison to occupy the entire upper half of the scene. The downward angles of the branches gently guide the viewer's attention back down to the castle walls, but sway at the near perfect height for a person to climb back up if they wanted. It almost feels like an invitation, trapping the viewer's attention in a cycle of climbing the golden branches up to the tree before gently floating back down. I was initially frustrated with how the artist chose to set up the perspective here, considering Homing Instinct has some quality elements of rage bait built into its foundation, but more intensive scrutiny here might lead the observer down a completely different path, one that ruminates emphatically over the sweet majesty of an earthen form that so dominantly conquers everything surrounding it that it doesn't even need to ask for attention. It knows it has you entranced right at the very second of perception. Sniffing out the vantage point gives the player Fire's Deadly Sin, an incantation with a prophecy so ominous anyone in duels will look at you with the same entranceful majesty as that of the Erd Tree itself. I know this is true because those are the reactions I get when casting casting it. It gets boosted by the old lore talisman. Its DOT to the player is so underwhelming that any more than like one regenerative tool or armor piece can easily counteract it. Its hitbox's dagger range. It doesn't get boosted by the giant seal since it's technically not a giant's flame incantation. Stacks with Mantle of Thorns, removes frostbite status from your character. I'm just gonna be real. I'm going through like a catalog of nice info about the spell here because I feel no excitement whatsoever when I think about it. It's not good. It's not good because it feels like half of it is missing somewhere. It could have been a way to deal with rot in some capacity since there's lore in the game about fire being used to cleanse it. It could have borrowed from some of the DLC consumables that increase various stats while gradually sapping HP. It could have just been a generic attack boost, setting it as an equal of power within. But all it does is deal damage to targets that are close to you. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can handle invisible scarabs with it. Yeah, this spell is not exciting. Sorcerer! This painting captures the landscape of someone's last moments, huh? Yeah, let's perhaps not choose a vantage point next to the building-sized Halloween decoration guarding the bridge. Bitch almost zapped my ass too. The Sorcerer painting was the final piece of the original 7 to be examined in the first video, but thankfully after this, the DLC gave us 3 additional heartthrobs for us to salivate over, and we will be salivating over them. The vertical continuation in this piece is unashamedly overwhelming, and its chosen element of focus is equally overwhelming. Because of this, the perceived message conveyed by the scene to its observers on the surface seems obvious. Holy goddamn shit, that moon is big! The painting seemingly trumpets to the rooftops. But lest we forget, this was the moon that Renala herself gazed upon according to the description. The height and size of the moon position it in a way that presides over everything else in the scene without being an overbearing force, which might be a commentary that lends itself both to the moon's power and influence. But there's an incredibly critical detail hiding in plain sight here in this scene which I neglected to mention: the rise, pointing directly upwards towards the moon in the exact center of the scene. And this isn't just any rise. This is the heretical rise, containing the sorcery Founding Reign of Stars, the eldest primeval sorcery. This opens up a massive window of lore-related inferences to the moon and stars, 2 recurring symbolic motifs that constantly appear in various glintstone sorceries and characters related to the Academy of Raya Lucaria, leading me to believe, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that this artist absolutely knew how to frame this painting, and definitely knew some forbidden-ass shit that they probably shouldn't have. And now for the reward. Look, I'ma keep it a buck. This shit should autocorrect your character name to Pinhead, because once you become Elden Lord, that is all anyone recounting your place in history will ever refer to you as. Your name is gonna get power washed into the forgotten gutters of time itself, and kids from generations in the future will learn about the Radon festival where 7 of the kingdom's strongest were led by a fucking ice cream cone. Oversized helmets and clown costumes sometimes end up as community favorites because of how insanely good the stats are. But the game's over 4 years old at this point. I just don't think that really matters. I never wore the Mensis Cage because it had good arcane and frenzy resistance while also offering serviceable physical defense in a way that made me wonder if my Tomb Prospector attire was sacrificing too much. I wore the Mensis Cage because I was on a fucking mission from God. So if I'm ranking the Great Hood in any capacity, it either deserves an S rank or it just shouldn't be ranked at all. It gives you an intelligence and a faith boost, making it a pretty nice drip choice for Golden Order incantations and Gelmir sorceries, and nothing matches that golden-clad Tree Sentinel set for your Spellblade character like a traffic cone on your head. Actually, you know what? Traffic cone kind of feels like it's begging to be a visual theme at times too. It also throttles your max HP by 9 fucking percent. 9%. That is not a small amount. It sounds like a small amount. It is not small. If it's big enough for me to have to dedicate a talisman to the deficit if I don't feel like dealing with it, it's not small. It's not exactly big, but it matters. If you really want to look the part, I suppose you could match it with the Queen's Robe or some other deep blue sorcerer garment, but prepare to lose 9% of your max HP for your Pyramid Head cosplay. Whether or not that's worth, I can't really make that decision for you. Alright, DLC paintings, here we go. Domain of Dragons. Commencing my conjectural analysis on the painter's depiction of this scenery, I would like to extend as an establishing abstract that the presented subject matter has fuck all to do with dragons. This statement defines the framework of my analysis and contextualizes my judgment, because the fact that this painting has nothing to do with dragons is actually extremely important. First, the painting itself. There's an obvious focal point here, and its lack of visual minutiae, though plain and uninspiring on the surface, is a creative decision that I find myself in agreement with. Everything you see in this scenery is begging you to take in the glorious dark majesty of Shadow Altus's Shadow Tree. The tree's main bowl and two neighboring spires to its left share the same role in forcefully dragging the viewer's perspective towards the top of the scene to experience a breathtaking explosion formed by millions of little branches. Your eye then naturally extends outward, following the branches, and arrives at the jagged cliff sides bordering the painting. This discourages your attention from scattering and returns you back to the Shadow Tree's golden grandeur, almost as if to double-check that the viewer is giving it the proper glazing the scene deserves. It is a rare and natural display of one of fine art's most common motifs, the synonymity of beauty and peril. The jagged cliff sides that double as a harsh border for the scene are a very rigid, very intentional choice of enclosure that almost seems to visually threaten any attempt to disengage from the scene. It overindulgently recognizes the Shadow Tree's majesty, placing you behind the eyes of someone so unconditionally captivated by its grandeur that they've lost their sense of self. It is an immaculate representation of spellbound beauty. There is not a single literal or metaphorical mention or even vague allusion to a dragon that can be seen for miles, except for the rock formations that border the subject matter, hence the painting's title. Because everyone knows it ain't enough to find the painting, you have to find the painter. And without that title being what it is to lend context to its reward location, this vantage point could have been from anywhere in the whole goddamn DLC. The title is what tells the player that even if the whole mountain is covered in storm clouds that obscure your vision when looking at anything outside of the region, just keep searching anyways, because maybe there's an area where it doesn't storm, and now you can see the tree depicted. The artist didn't decide on this title, Elden Ring did, and they chose it by creating a comically vague vantage point that's so visually impossible to deduce that when someone proposed that the camera be backed up to include the cliffs as a geographical hint, it still wasn't enough. And so the fitting title of Domain of Dragons was concepted, because how else in the shitload of fuck is an average player who only games a couple hours after work gonna figure this out? But once I journeyed to the location and received its reward, I understood very quickly why getting to it involves a small amount of bullshit. It's because Rock Heart spanks so ass-reddeningly hard that any malice I had towards the game for picking such an obscure spot in the jagged peak now makes complete sense to me. This item should put up a fight. The Rock Heart starts by giving you 10% total damage negation and a free 50 resistance versus every ailment off rip, but Dragon Communion builds now get 2 items dedicated entirely to their performance. And this is already a casting subtype with some of the most terrorizingly powerful atom bombs in the game. Dragon Maw, Grail's Roar, Theo's Magma, the 2 Bale incantations. Like, if you're running any kind of build that even has a Dragon Communion incantation just thrown in there as an aside, you should at least look at this. It stacks with Exalted Flesh and Contagious Fury, and some of the subtype's Ballbreaker incantations reach a spike of absurdity that could book an hour special on Comedy Central, it's so hilarious. Sacred Tower. Even though Domain of Dragons earned my appreciation with its symbolism, I find myself personally liking Sacred Tower just a bit more. It intends to convey a very similar theme, containing elements which articulate a clear and unconditional appreciation for spectacle, but it does this with a whimsical guiltlessness that isn't felt in Domain of Dragons. Sacred Tower proudly declares in the most straightforward way possible, look at how fucking goddamn sexy this tower is. I don't feel like I'm being manipulated when I look at this scene, which in a way can be argued as even more dangerous. It's even got an interesting mechanic to it that blocks you from accessing the reward even if you know the location, since you must first clear the Shadow Thorns from the tower by defeating Mesmer and using the kindling for the scene on the canvas to be accurate. The spiral is referred to in various DLC items like Spira as a normalized crucible current that will one day form a column that stretches to the gods, and it's kinda cool that you can see the same spiraling pattern motifs represented and built into the edifice of Inir Elam itself, a detail the painter captures brilliantly. The strong verticality of the composition honestly isn't something I can attribute to the painter themselves, because a lot of that can just be found in the building itself. Visiting the vantage point after using the kindling to burn the thorns rewards you the Spiral Tree Seal. It's a post-game item, and its boosting of 3 DLC exclusive incantations all make it incredibly hard to justify any general use application of the seal just because you're given so many earlier and better options. The tracking on Spira still needs a noticeable improvement to be worth considering, and the 2 arc incantations are, well, I mean, they are consistent at least, but the damage suffers a pretty hard drop-off in just about any situation outside of the DLC to where the 20% damage boost feels like it honestly needs to be there for these incantations to actually make a difference in combat. I don't know, it's honestly a good seal, like it's fine. I just feel like they give it to you way too late. And finally, the Incursion painting. I had to converge all my knowledge and gray matter onto a single bullet-sized focal point directly above my forehead. I tried meditation, I went to a Catholic mass, I could not figure out what was so fucking interesting about this vantage point. This scene has to do with Mesmer and his crusade against the Hornsent that led to Mesmer and his soldiers burning the tower settlement, contextualized by the serpent crest shield you pick up as a reward for visiting the scene's location. But choosing to depict this scene specifically from this vantage point obstructs a lot of the Crusade's darkest and most grating aftershocks. No corpses, no charred flags or discarded armor sets. I can't even see the fucking settlement. However, I examined further and came to a very grim realization. There is an encroaching gradient of scarlet, red, and orange marching up to the settlement with such a thick tenor of malevolence that it becomes the main focus of the entire scene, a detail that is completely absent when observing from this vantage point, which could only mean the artist of this painting watched the crusade against Belleroth unfurling in real time, and when appreciated through this lens, this painting is no longer a painting, but a time capsule of immense importance. This painting slaps the reddest of asses, and it's only fitting that its rewards slap an equal amount, because the Serpent Crest shield is probably top 5 shields in the whole game. Though goated as it may be, it fails to be the supreme apex predator of all medium shields, which is a crown eternally, physically molded to the head of the golden Dorito chip, and it ain't coming off. But slap the Pearl Drake talisman on, and that crown might start feeling a bit threatened. At plus 25, it's only a single point of guard boost behind the brass shield, with noticeably stronger fire negation and, well, equally noticeably weaker negation on everything else. They're both 100% physical though, as is the case with pretty much all metal-made medium shields, and Scholar's Shield and Old Lore Talisman are worth considering in my opinion, since it gives you an extra 70% magic damage negation to play with. It doesn't add the damage negation to what the shield already has, you just take 70% less magic damage than you normally would have. So if you took 100 magic damage before when behind the shield, then now you're only going to take 30. And if the guard boost is something you're willing to sacrifice, you can spice it up with a flame art or fire infusion, and then shove your newly acquired 79% fire negation guitar pick right down the throat of Shadowkeep and out of Mesmer's slithery ass. Also, if guard boost is something you can sacrifice, like if you're playing around with a really meaty, like metal medium shield, consider looking at shield infusions, because shield infusions are pretty fucking huge, and I don't think a lot of people use them, and I think more people should.